I'm Josh Harris, and you're listening to Clear and Loud, a podcast about the ideas, stories, and voices that are shaping our world. There are two kinds of people in the world. People who think there are two kinds of people in the world, and people who don't. Those are the words of Louis Menand in an article for The New Yorker about personality tests. So I'm curious, what do you think about personality assessments? Are they helpful? Are they helpful in running a business? Do you think there are different kinds of people in the world and that we can measure this and that can help us know ourselves and understand other people and work better with others? Well, I'm talking today to Vanessa Fernandez, who is an executive coach and a triple certified Enneagram teacher. She's the founder of the Enneagram Workshop, and she really knows her stuff. She's been a speaker at the International Enneagram Association Global Conference, been published in Enneagram Magazine, and she works with teams at companies like Deloitte, YouTube, CleverTech, and more. Whether or not you are familiar with the Enneagram as a tool, you might even have a negative impression of it, because let me just say right now, I know how annoying it is when other people start talking about any personality assessment and you don't know about it, and they start going on, and they start trying to type you and psychoanalyze you. So maybe you've had those bad experiences, but I want to encourage you to keep listening. If you lead a business or a team especially, I think you're going to want to hear this conversation. We're going to talk about the Enneagram and how it can foster a human-first approach in corporate settings without sacrificing efficiency or results. We're also going to have Vanessa walk through every Enneagram type and give perspective on how each of these different types can grow as a leader and really bridge the gap between how you think you're coming across to the people you want to lead and influence and how you're actually coming across. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Vanessa Fernandez. For the person that is completely new to this, how would you explain the Enneagram? What is the Enneagram?
The Enneagram is a system, and we know that all systems are flawed, but some are helpful. This tends to be a really helpful system to understand how each person both perceives the world and then also the strategies that they use in order to make their way in the world. And so there are 9 different types, and your type is your type from birth to death. And it's just a great way to understand how you move through the world in ways that may be instinctual, but not always conscious of. It kind of uncovers those parts of us.
I'm not an expert by any means in personality tests or the Enneagram, but it seems like the Enneagram has a little bit more of a spiritual side to it. Is that true?
Yes. It began as a way for spiritual transformation and growth. There was a group of Jesuit priests who locked onto it. There was a group of Sufi in Egypt, Sufi practitioners that latched onto it. So it's an ancient symbol. It's an ancient sort of geometrical way to understand the world, and it has been adopted by many different groups in order to transform. But it's also been effective in secular spaces as well. But there's absolutely very deep roots to it in the spiritual space.
Well, I guess that's kind of my next question. That whole idea of self-knowledge, understanding your true self, how does that translate to the business world? Is it just too touchy-feely? Does it get into things that are actually practical and helpful? So I guess that's my curiosity is how does this become useful for people who run businesses, who lead organizations, who work with teams?
Yeah, it can be taken as surface level as, these are some ways to communicate with this type, all the way down to this is like the core child wound of this type. So it really is versatile. Obviously, when I work with corporations, we're not talking about childhood trauma. We don't need to. There's plenty to work with. But I do always approach this with corporations by saying the most valuable asset we have are humans, is ourselves, are the individuals that comprise our teams and our corporations and our groups. And humans bring the whole selves to work. We don't leave parts of us behind. And of course, we, edit ourselves to be able to show up in the capacity that we need to. But it would be foolish to think that there are not all kinds of factors contributing to how someone is performing, how someone is listening, how someone is communicating, how they're processing stressful situations, right? When we encounter stress and individuals who don't make sense to us, and we're trying to navigate some of these things, we're bringing all of the tools that we have available to us. And the way that we, see the world and the strategies that we employ, which is our Enneagram type, is what's informing those tools. And so in the corporate world, we talk a lot about, what are your default tools? And then are those serving you in every single engagement that you find yourself in? And if they're not, how can we expand to be able to access more tools? So the Enneagram kind of helps us understand what is the default, what tools maybe we don't really have access to, and is that impacting our performance? Is that impacting how we collaborate as a group? So I definitely feel that it has application in the corporate world, even though, yes, we can also go into all the deep places as well.
What's your opinion of different personality tests? If someone's looking at, Myers-Briggs or DISC or whatever it might be, what is it that distinguishes the Enneagram? Why is it uniquely helpful in different contexts?
Yeah. So to my knowledge, the other personality tests tend to deal with the external facing parts of us. Am I an extrovert? Am I an introvert? Do I tend to, be more of a yellow or a red or a blue, right? In the way that I function in the world. And that is helpful. The Enneagram kind of goes to the inside. What is motivating my extrovertness? What is motivating my introverted tendencies? And that's really powerful because we can start to see how those motivations really come under all of our, things that we say and strategies that we use to get what we want. So it kind of allows us to go under the hood and retool some things and start to understand a little bit deeper. And it really creates some effortless transformation rather than saying, I'm a little quiet in the boardroom and I need to be more assertive, so I got to try and be more extroverted. That can feel clunky. That can feel really difficult to try and retool from the outside in. But if we come inside and say, okay, how is this strategy of being more quiet serving me? Well, I can listen more. I can integrate more. I can get all the pieces, and that really serves me. And if I really want to have clarity and power, I also need some other tools. It kind of comes from underneath. And instead of going against our strategy, we try to understand how can we still serve our strategy and really tap into where we naturally want to go, but just allow us to expand. So it's kind of a softer under the belly work that we can do. And tends to be a little bit more insightful. When I go through some of these profiles, people kind of have their jaws on the ground as to how accurate and specific some of these profiles are, because we're getting to that kind of core motivation.
One question I have for you is there a danger that people use a tool like the Enneagram to justify bad behavior instead of working to improve and to change?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be used to not only justify your behavior by saying, oh, well, I'm just an 8, so I just get to be, abrasive or what have you. And actually the core, the Enneagram tells us the role that we're playing, the mask that we're wearing, who we think we have to be in the world in order to be seen, in order to have power, in order to accomplish what it is that we feel like we should. And actually, when we attach to this role, that's when our toolbox is limited. right? Like I have to be this in order to make my way in the world. So these are my only tools. I could never.
So where we actually hide behind that
Yep.
identity and say, well, this is the only way that I can function. This is my safety and security. That's actually a negative thing.
It is, if it cuts us off from other tools that we need to use.
Right.
Right. So for example, with the type 2, if the type 2 always has to be a giver, they can never receive. And it's not wrong to be a giver, but if that attachment is so rigid, then it cuts off the 2 from being able to both give and receive. And of course, we know, a reservoir turns quite pungent and, overrun with bacteria if there's no in and out flow, right? We have to be able to say, yes, these strategies serve me. And also I cut myself off from other strategies if I'm overly attached to this persona. That's really where each type kind of gets into trouble, when they overuse their strategy without having access to others.
Well, I would love for you, if you'd be willing, to walk through each of the 9 Enneagram types and just give a simple introduction to each one. And then, insight that particular number could use in how they're, functioning as a leader in a business or leading a team and so on. Like what does their Enneagram number tell them about themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll start with type 1. And type 1 is striving to be perfect, and they value excellence. And so their strategy is a critical eye, right? If I don't see what's wrong, I can't fix it. So that's the strategy they use. At their best, they inspire others with this compelling vision of how the world can be. Oh, we can get rid of poverty. We can get rid of this. We can get rid of all of these things that I see as being wrong in the world. One of the terms that we use for this type is the reformer. We want to reform what is not good. And there is this distance. Every type has this distance between how we experience ourselves and how others experience us. And being aware of that distance is where we can do a lot of work around being a better leader, a better communicator, etc. For the type 1, they perceive themselves as helpful. Oh, here, let me fix that for you. Oh, here, let me make that better. But others can perceive them as critical, right? If that strategy of the critical eye is overused, then it feels like I never do anything right. Is there anything good that they see in me, or do they only see the flaws? And so that's where that distance is where the type 1 can do some work. For the type 2, they're striving to be connected. So they value generosity, and their strategy is being helpful. Who is taking care of is sort of the question running around in the type 2's head. Who's taking care of these refugees coming from another country? Who's taking care of those people who need help? They tend to see themselves as the source of provision. And I was just mentioning the 2s needing to give and receive. What is actually true is that 2s are not the source of provision, but they can be a co-creator of provision. So rather than it flows from me, I flow with it. And that relaxes the 2 to say, I can both give and receive. And the way that they perceive themselves is also as helpful, similarly to the type 1. But others can perceive them as overreaching, maybe trying to help in ways that nobody asked for. Thinking that they can come in and take care of everyone. And sometimes that's what's needed, and sometimes it's not. So that's the distance that the 2 can find when they are trying to do things in the world.
I'm an Enneagram 2, so I'm taking notes on this.
Yeah.
It's all very true.
Yeah. Well, and where we work with the strategy is, would the type 2 be more connected if they were able to both give and receive? Because both giving and receiving connects you to someone, just in different directions. And so with the 2 wanting to be connected, but then cutting off half of the space where you get to connect with people, it actually isn't serving your desire. So that's where we want to expand some of those tools, right? All right. Type 3s are striving to be outstanding, and they value success and the effort it takes to get success. Their strategy is hustle, just hustle and work.
A
But they're
lot of
bringers of,
entrepreneurs, a lot of
yes,
that start businesses and achieve amazing success are threes. Interesting.
absolutely. Absolutely. They're bringers of hope. Whereas the type 2 is trying to bring provision and care for others, type 3s are trying to bring hope. They're trying to say, hey, we can do this. Don't give up. Look at what we can accomplish if we work together, if we work a little bit later, if we, what have you. The distance between how they perceive themselves and others perceive them is that 3s perceive themselves as heroes, right? Kind of single-handedly carrying that burden. But others can see them as aspirational, but not relatable, right? Like, I look up to you, but I don't know if I can really connect to you, because 3s tend to hide some of their flaws and vulnerability in order to put up that, superhero with the big S on my chest, believe in me. So that's where the distance, and 3s are much more inspiring when they do let themselves be seen in more authenticity. So that's the distance there. Type 4s are striving to feel unique, and they value authenticity. So their strategy is to make deeper meaning from things and to see the beauty beneath the surface. They tend to feel like they want to trailblaze and create a new world, but maybe no one will get it. Maybe no one will get their vision, right? There's kind of this doubting, but also wanting to be this unique flower. The distance between how they perceive themselves and others perceive them is that they perceive themselves as trailblazers, as deep, creative, unique people. Others can perceive them as somewhat melancholic and sort of overly emotional in sort of some of those darker spaces. And so that's where that distance and the 4s can feel frustrated that their vision isn't getting across. And there's some work that can be done there for the 4. Type 5s are striving to feel detached, and they value clarity. So their strategy is...
Just pause for 1 second, because that
yeah.
is such an interesting statement. They want to be detached.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
They want to detach because that will give them greater clarity, or they perceive that will give them greater clarity around a situation. Okay. Right? If I can sit up in the crow's nest, then I can see clearly what is happening. If I'm in the middle of the battle, it's messy, it's muddy, it's loud. I don't have clarity if I'm engaged.
Right.
So they detach, they research, they think deeply, they withdraw, and they, sort of percolate on what the situation is, because they want to feel clear and they don't want to be overwhelmed by all that's happening. They kind of want to know very deeply, but kind of similarly with the type 2, they can only know a certain amount from a distance. At a certain point, you have to engage in order to fully know in an embodied way. So this is where their strategy serves them, but it also keeps them from half of the body of knowledge that would really contribute to what they want. They tend to experience themselves as logical. Every time I talk with a type 5 and I'm kind of asking them about how they do things, they'll end so many sentences with, well, doesn't everyone do it that way? Well, isn't that how everyone approach it? Like, it's just very cut and dry, logical to them. But others may experience them as interesting, but very private. Right? Like, some of the most interesting conversations I have are with 5s, because they're brilliant. They learn a lot. They know a lot. And yet there's a wall that you're not getting any further into. They tend to guard some of their own heart in that way.
If you enjoy this podcast, show some love to our sponsor, Beanfields. Beanfields are crunchy, mouth-watering chips with full-on flavor. And you can enjoy bag after bag because they're healthy. These plant-based chips are vegan, non-GMO, gluten-free, corn-free, and come in incredible flavors like sour cream, nacho, fiery hot, Korean barbecue, and ranch. They are positively addicting. Visit beanfields.com to order directly, or just go to your local Whole Foods or natural food store.
For type 6s, they're striving to feel supported, and they really value community. Their strategy is to see around the corner and plan for the worst.
Mm.
If I can, I think of them as like Navy SEALs. Like if I know where all the exits are, where there could be a possible ambush, I've got myself ready for whatever might come, because that's how I support the people in my corner. That's how I hold and feel held by everyone around me, is that we're vigilant. So they experience themselves as ready, right? Stay ready so you don't have to get ready, just like that readiness. Others may experience them as nervous though, right? There's this
Oh, that's
energy
fascinating. Yeah.
around that kind of makes people feel like, all right, are you nervous? Like that feels like a lot. And so really with 6, when we stay in that heightened state, it drains our adrenals and we don't have the resources if danger were to come to actually engage in what we need to do to protect those around us. And so the strategy of, at times we need to let ourselves relax and trust our training and trust our resources,
Right.
because only in a relaxed state are we able to really support and do that kind of protection that the 6s want to do. So again, we see how the strategy helps, but also cuts off resources for the 6 when it comes to what they are striving for. The 7 is striving to feel excited and inspired. So they value new experiences. Their strategy is to plan for the future and amplify all the good things. More is better. Like, give me more. Let's do more. How can we heighten this experience? What can we add to this? They're always taking things to that next level. They're visionaries. They're doers. They experience themselves as excited, right? Like they just bring the energy to the room. But others can experience them as scattered and all over the place, right? Because they tend to be excited about lots of things like popcorn, just all over the place.
Right.
And so all of the vision that the 7 has, it can be hard for them to bring it into fruition if they're not able to settle in on one idea and see it through to the end. So we kind of see where that's playing in for the 7. And for the 8, they're striving to feel powerful. They value truth, and their strategy is to tap into their energy and their leadership. And they have a 0 bullshit meter, and they just kind of, real strong. They tend to be the hero. They tend to be the one that people go to in crisis, because they can hold a lot. And they experience themselves as big-hearted but guarded, right? There's a little bit of prickliness around 8s at times. Others can experience them as dominating or unrestrained, right? All that power that the 8 has is like power to protect and sometimes power to wound those who are around them. So the 8 can play around with some of that intensity. Is it communicating what you want it to communicate? Is it actually translating as you would want it to? And then the type 9 is striving to feel peaceful, and they value balance. Their strategy is to make room for others and not rock the boat. They're kind of like a very, balancing, almost like a liquid that just goes into all the cracks, but doesn't really have a form of its own. They tend to go along to get along. They can assert themselves, especially on issues related to justice. 9s will assert themselves. But if it comes to their own personal preferences or what have you, they just are a little bit more nebulous. They experience themselves as even-keeled, just pretty calm on most days. Others can experience them, though, as ambiguous. You don't always know where they stand. You don't always know what they believe, because to a certain opinion might offend someone, right? So they can kind of talk around the issue rather than directly address it. And all of these types could be fabulous leaders, but we can see where, for example, the type 9, at some point, the leader has to take a stand, right? At some point, there needs to be an asserting of some sort of vision. And it's hard to do that if you're also trying to not say anything that would bother anyone. So we just look at what are these strategies giving us and what do they take from us if we become overly attached.
There's so much that could be applied in the context of an organization and how people are working together. And it's just interesting because I think, we even without having this terminology and without understanding these different categories, we recognize things in people like, oh, they're so good at that. And then at times that very thing becomes a thing that people are annoyed by, or there's a problem caused because of that. And I I can just see how if you were positioning people or developing people, understanding the Enneagram types could allow you to really be more appreciative, nurture, their strengths in different ways, coach them toward growth, help them see, okay, yes, you're meaning to do this, and this is what you're understanding about your actions or your communication, but other people on the team are receiving it in this way. When companies like Deloitte or YouTube, some of these, big organizations approach you and bring you in to consult and work with their teams, what are some of the challenges that they're facing in how they're managing and developing?
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways that the Enneagram is helping corporations right now. Two of the big ways is, first of all, with burnout, helping companies to support their employees through burnout, because each type, their strategy when it's overused is going to contribute to burnout in some sort of way. And the support that type needs in order to come back to balance and be able to resource themselves is going to look different. So as companies are trying to support their teams and their staff, doing just sort of a one size fits all support for people is not effective, right? So helping to understand what kind of policies, what kind of strategies can we employ to support burnout. But also a lot of these companies are taking a shift towards humanizing corporate culture, which is wonderful. And so we're also talking about each individual advocating for their own support, right? Being conscious enough of what I need and how I overdo my strategy, trying to employ different practices that might help keep us, almost like preventative medicine, keep us from burnout. But then also when we reach burnout, how to advocate for like, actually, this is what I need. Is that okay? And what have you? And as these corporations are shifting from sort of a very structured, like everyone has to take this kind of PTO, et cetera, it just really becomes much more efficient and supportive for the team. So that's sort of one side around burnout and support. There's also another side where, because of the Great Resignation, there's difficulty in filling different positions. And I was working with this one tech company, and they had a ton of obviously brilliant programmers and systems analysts, but those individuals were missing some of the soft skills that they needed to move up into some other positions. And Of course, it made much more sense for them to hire from within and pull up, but they were struggling on how to bridge that gap with the skills. And so with the Enneagram, we kind of came in and, as I was saying earlier, come under the underbelly and start figuring out, I don't want to change someone from being really analytical to all of a sudden being this nurturing, connective, what have you, but also saying, how do we develop some more tools for you so that you're still you, but you can also accommodate a different job as you need to, navigate sort of different spaces. So those are kind of
That's so good.
two spaces. Yeah. And there's obviously tons of application, but that's kind of where we're mostly working in right now.
Well, you mentioned the Great Resignation. I've read 33 million Americans have quit their jobs since the spring of 2021. Obviously, the pandemic has been a huge shift for a lot of people, but what do you see happening in people? Like, what's the trend that's taking place in the way people view work and fulfillment at work? And why do you think so many people are changing their jobs?
Oof, that's a big question, maybe beyond my my pay grade. But I do think that this holistic understanding that we're no longer seeing ourselves as fragmented. This is my employee, persona, and then this is my parent persona, and then this is my whatever persona. But it actually, again, kind of cuts us off from parts of ourselves and parts of our power and parts of what makes us great at things when we try to fragment how we show up in places. And so I think as people are, even working from home, right? You're petting your dog while you're writing a proposal, and then you throw in a load of laundry, and you start to realize, wait a minute, when I'm a full person, I'm actually quite effective. I actually feel better. There's just this coming to wholeness that I think could possibly be a factor around, people wanting more than just having to show up with a very almost like two-dimensional
Right.
persona at work.
And even just the space to be aware of their own feelings, maybe, it's like the pandemic was this massive pause for the whole world. And it's not surprising that in the midst of that, people would start asking deeper questions about what they actually want out of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the more that we start to see that things could be a different way, sometimes it's like, well, this is just how it is. And something, I think, opened, some sort of mental door opened for all of us that maybe things could be a little bit of a different way. And so I think a lot of companies are struggling to hold on to good talent, especially good talent. People who are self-starters and motivated and brilliant are kind of figuring out like, hey, I can do some things on my own. I can hodgepodge some whatever freelance work. But those are some of the most valuable assets that a company has that really is hard to replace people like that. And so starting to treat humans like humans, kind of a novel thing, but I'm loving it. And I think it's a really important as we move forward in the corporate world.
You talked about the importance of humanizing the workplace, but how do you reconcile what feels like, the highly competitive landscape where businesses need to make money, and if you're leading a team, you need results?
Yeah. Oh man. So there is this duality between structure and flow that may seem like they're opposites, and yet almost like the yin yang symbol, you can't have one without a little bit of the other, and you can't have the other without a little bit of one. You can't have the flow of creativity without some structure to hold it. And also, you can't have really intelligent structure that's not inspired by some sort of creative insight or inspiration. And so I think rather than seeing them as opposing forces, well, if we don't drive people, then we're not going to have great results. And if we just let everyone do what they want, then there's not going to be any goal hitting or what have you. Really looking at how they interplay and how they can work with each other. How much structure do we need in order for some of these ideas or some of these, results to come? And then sort of how much inspiration and space do we need when we're doing things like data analysis? Because I kind of I'll work with real creative spaces, and then I'll work with real data-driven scientists. And both of them, if they're all just one, if you just have the structure but nothing filling it, it's a rigid, dead, kind of container with nothing in it. And yet if you have all this flow and creativity but nothing holding it, it just floats out and never, no one ever experiences the brilliance of it.
Yeah.
So it really is about finding how do they interplay with each other. And it takes trust to trust, especially the flow, that the flow will thrive when there is supportive structure that trusts it, rather than a structure that's trying to control it. So a chalice rather than a cage kind of idea. And when that trust is there, I tend to find that companies find a good balance, right? When they kind of trust, like, all right, if I let people have some PTO when they need it, if I let this and that, it actually fosters this life now that is like kind of pulsing within the structure that I've created, and I don't need to control. And of course, for all CEOs that I work with, we work a lot around fear. We work a lot around dealing with the discomfort of fear. How do we not make knee-jerk reactions out of fear, and actually intelligent strategies that align with our values? So yeah, there's definitely kind of layers around, yes, how you structure your company, but also how you manage your own reactivity. And those two, when they are really being worked on, it's magic. I love it.
What about the process of hiring? How does the Enneagram inform that? I mean, are there times where an organization could actually be saying, you know what, we really need an Enneagram 7, for this kind of role, or is that a wrong way to think about the role of the Enneagram in building your team?
I mean, not necessarily. I actually do a lot of talent acquisition for some of my corporate clients where, they'll either hire someone and I'll do an Enneagram profile with them and then kind of report back like, here's the person you have in this role. Here's how we maximize what they are bringing. And here's some places for development. Sometimes I'm even there on the front end before they're added to the team to kind of evaluate, is this a good fit? And so I don't know that it would need to be as narrow as we need a 7 for this role. However, I think
party planning.
Right, well, yeah,
right?
maybe. But at the very least, I do think it's really important to know what kinds of obviously skills and not just skills, but the kind of energy, the kind of values that we want someone to embody for that role. I think that is important. And then of course the Enneagram can kind of shortcut you to be like, all right, I'm pretty sure this type 7 is going to have a value on fun and, pushing all of the limits to make things better and more exciting.
Last question. There's so much mistrust and polarization in the world today. Politically, from a religious standpoint, all different kinds of issues. Issues of race, sexuality divide us on so many different fronts. What is your learning about the Enneagram taught you about how each of us can be a part of trying to bridge some of those divides and bring peace in different settings that we're in?
Yeah, we're not all that different, I think, is one of the main pieces. Everyone is operating from their own logic. It's just a different logic than what I'm operating from, right? When I realize that every type has their own values, their own strategies for getting those values, and they feel just as real and authentic to them as mine do to me. And actually, when you look at the Enneagram symbol, it's a big circle and we've got all the points going around the edges. And I like to think that objective truth lies right in the center. And each type is looking at it from its own vantage point. And the way that each type sees, it's valid what they're seeing, but we're also missing parts that someone else is seeing more clearly from their perspective. So, the Enneagram really helps us to value other perspectives. It holds that no one has the corner market and sees everything perfectly without bias. In fact, if you ascribe to the Enneagram, you are basically admitting, I have a particular lens, I have a particular bias, and I have a particular way of seeing the world. And the more I'm aware of it, I can start to adjust and listen. But when we're unaware and we think, well, this is it, this is the way, this is all the truth, and it's right here, and I have it, and I know it, and I see it. That's when that friction, I think, comes between us. But also, even an ability to not attach to having to have peace in the world. Sometimes we need peace. Sometimes we need to fight. Sometimes we need to stand firm. Sometimes we need to give way. And even in that, the Enneagram kind of helps us see that there's room for it all. There's room for the fighters and for those who want to just comfort. And in fact, if we never have anyone who wants to fight, right, we're kind of again, we cut off power. We cut off parts of ourselves because, let's stop fighting. Well, at some
Sometimes
point
you need uncomfortable conversations and conflict to change the world for good.
Yes. So that's, that is a big question, but I think the Enneagram is a beautiful tool to just start expanding. Hey, what if we all get a place around the circle? What if I don't have to annihilate you in order for me to be here? What if there's room, for all of this?
Thanks for listening to the Clear and Loud podcast. I'm your host, Josh Harris. Our producer is Pam Cameron, and this episode contains music by Jeremy Yaddo at Music for Podcasts. If you like what you hear, give us a boost by subscribing or leaving a review on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen. We'd also love your feedback on today's episode. Or if you have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode or a guest you'd like us to consider, email us at hello@clearandloud.com. You can also shoot us a direct message on Instagram. Our handle is @clearandloud. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.